just ask me just that one question. I ain't interested. I don't know. Ruth
Not
don't care.
interested in follow-ups?
I don't care what my score would be.
There you go.
You need to add something that would make it better. What would you do if you could live a lifetime without needing to work, you put it? Okay.
Needing to work and, maybe, if money was,
And had plenty of money?
Yeah. Yeah. What would you do? Travel. Any number one place come to your mind? There's no follow-up question, but you could travel anywhere. Mediterranean?
You can only travel so much.
You can only travel so much. Okay. What else? What else would you do if you didn't have to work?
I would be one of the people working at the preemie nursery at the hospital. I would want to just rock the babies. I have, I've said that like ever since Brooke was little,
This is gonna be
that's what I would do,
just rocking baby.
because they need that.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, I thought you said drop the baby. That's why it took me a minute on just because you don't have to work, I don't know. Okay, just rock babies all the time, that sounds a lot better. All right, thought we were gonna have to change the lesson. All right.
Well, and Timothy didn't try, I like to, along with her, I like to read stories to children, just go from one school to the other, or one day or something like that, I think it's fun to do.
Yeah, yeah, I remember when I was in school, I don't know, I think, I don't know if everyone does read across America or whatever that is, but, we did this thing when I was in first or second grade where we went and we did reading at a nursing home, and, so our class, our first or second grade class went and, the cat ran or whatever the book was, but, that was a lot of fun for us, but I think, obviously it's so much more fun. In fact, at my grandpa's funeral, a few weeks ago, there was one of the elders' wives that her husband served with my grandpa for 30 years, but she said, I can still remember when you came, when you were in the first grade out to, wherever, because her relative was out there and so forth. And I said, wow, that's amazing. So anyway, that's a great one. Speaking of reading, for me, I always have a stack, sometimes a digital stack, but a stack of books that I love to read. And it seems like finding time to read those books is difficult. So I think just being able to sit and read what you want to read, there's something to be said for that. Anything else come to mind?
Animal shelter.
An animal shelter. You
Petting-
be
petting the dogs.
rescuing dogs and cats and anything else. All right, I like it. To me, that sounds like it's very close to work, but not that everybody's got their different vision.
It's what you have to do.
Is my mic on? It is on. The green light's on. But you're right. I don't know that anything's coming out. I could trade the mics if we want. Testing. With that, or I'll just shout. You remember when we're watching the children, how they helped us imagine how Jesus might have taught a huge crowd of people? I don't know if you remember watching that or not, but Jesus would stand and he would teach something, and then the apostles would be scattered out.
They're awake.
But we can confirm that was the first time. Let me trade Darren here. Testing. Can you hear me? Well, let's start at the beginning. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Sorry about that. I guess I was shouting loud enough. I didn't seem like I was yelling at you. I think I just automatically compensated for that. All right. So we're thinking about, what would you do if you needed to? Oh, I never finished telling you how they helped us imagine how Jesus might have taught people in large settings. So the apostles would be, or disciples would be every,
several yards out in front of Jesus, and Jesus would say a sentence, then they would turn and say a sentence, and then another one would be down the way a little further, and he would hear the sentence and say it to the crowd. And that's probably one of the ways that they would have been able to communicate to a large audience if they didn't have a great acoustic environment. So something to think about there. Reminds me of being in like Zimbabwe or somewhere where there's a language difference, where if you're going to preach, you're going to speak a sentence, and then the translator is going to speak a sentence or two sentences or however many and relay it that way. So anyway, came to me as my mic wasn't working there. We're thinking about work. And if you didn't need to work, we all have different visions of what our life would be like. No babies dropped in the process of that. So if we could live a lifetime without needing to work. So we're thinking about God's plan for work this morning. And starting with Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, God has just created the whole world. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. I think it's easy for us to think about work mainly in terms of something that has to be done. But we all have a vision of how nice it would be to live without work, right? We all have a vision of these different things that we could do and see, and you know, some of those things are even other-centered, and some things are more self-centered. But the idea is, in the beginning, at the very beginning of this whole story of our world, Genesis describes God as working. In the beginning, God worked. And I just wonder, is it surprising to think of creation, to think of God creating the world? Is it surprising for Scripture to use the word work to describe what God does? Maybe it isn't surprising, but is it surprising to you? Is it interesting to you that God is described as being at work? Let me maybe illustrate this a bit. So in like Greek philosophical thought and also in like during the time of Moses, the ancient Near East, they had a lot of stories about creation and all that. But typically, work was seen as a punishment. Work was seen as something that happened to humans because things had basically gone wrong. In some Greek thought, they thought of a golden age where there was no work, but then, you know, the world just sort of was what it needed to be. But then, over time, humans kind of drifted from that, and we had to begin to work. Genesis speaks a different story. Genesis doesn't tell of a world that work came later, but actually describes work as being something God chooses to do before even humans are created. He works to bring out the sun. He works to bring the fish. He works to bring the firmament. Everything that he does in creation, Moses can write and say, God finished his work. What does it tell us about work to say that God works?
You felt like it was something you had to do, but then it begs the question, what did he do on the eighth day to continue his work?
Yeah. What did he do on the eighth day? Did he retire permanently, you know? There's a worldview that says that. Sort of the deist way of thinking about things is that there's a creator out there, and the creator basically is responsible for spinning the top, right? You know what a top is. You spin the top, and then he walks away. The top's still spinning, and you can watch it, and things happen there, but he's hands off, you know. We know that's not what happened. We don't have maybe time to get into all of that, but you're right. So God felt compelled to do this, and he did. But what else do we learn about work? Mary?
He did bless others.
He worked to bless others. He was working not for himself per se, but for bringing forth life and giving life to others. Yeah, Mike?
His work was productive.
His work was productive. Yeah.
I mean, to me, he uses the word work there, and I guess it's to create in us I mean, we see all that as a good thing for us. I mean, it wasn't like that he had to go work 7 hours, 10 hours a day. It was something that he wanted to do, and that's what he says in Ephesians 2:10, that that's why he created us for good works, which he prepared beforehand that we should walk in them.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be something we enjoy doing. It's not it's not so much a labor-intensive thing. It's just we enjoy doing it.
A labor of love. Yeah, for sure. So there's a real sense then that Genesis teaches us, from the beginning, that work is not itself a punishment, but it's actually part of God's nature to work. God wants to do things. God wants to bring forth this world, and so he does. Like Dan saying, God is not sitting there on his heavenly throne saying, well, it's 7 a.m. I guess I better get up and see what we can do today. Let's give us some lights, Why did it take God 7 days, 6 days of working, but why did it take God 7 days to create this place?
Well, it didn't. He just chose to do it that way for whatever reason.
How come, whatever the details are of how it all worked, why is it that Genesis describes 7 days as what God does?
Wasn't 7 a special number in biblical, 7 and 14 or something?
Yeah, 7, like in some of the apocryphal literature and stuff, it carries the idea of completeness. So there is that idea of a complete or perfection, but perfect in the sense of wholeness. So yeah, 7 makes sense with that. You're right. Think about a more maybe practical reason why, for us, and for how humans have lived all of history, basically, why 7 days?
He gave us a system. I mean, and that's what we go by today, generally.
He gave us a system, right? A system of a week, what we call a week, 7 days. And so it's not like God couldn't just snap his fingers and everything could happen in a moment. But would it be fair to say that God's modeling for us how to live in the world, how to think about work? So work is not a punishment in and of itself, but it is part of God's nature and his plan for us. Here's Genesis 2:15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And we referenced that last week as well, but there's this idea that part of God creating Adam and creating Eve was to give them the opportunity to work, to give them the opportunity to contribute to what God was already doing and what God had already established. So in saying all of this, we're thinking about what the forms of God's work and the forms of our work. What does work look like for Adam and Eve? What does work look like for God? And to some degree, what does it look like for us? That'll be the kind of application of that. So what does work do? We mentioned things like productivity and for others, and all those are true. Maybe we could think about it in some very broad categories. God's work is to create. And when we think of the word create, really, when you create something, you share yourself, right? You share. When an artist puts together a painting or a movie or a song, they're sharing something about themselves, right? They're putting themselves into what they create. And when God created the world, His signature is all over everything that he made, right? The heavens declare the glory of God. The stars, his handiwork, day after day, night after night, pours forth speech concerning God, is what the psalmist says in my loose summary there. So God creates, meaning God has shared himself, and then he works to care, to provide, to tend, to protect. So God doesn't just bring forth a world to say, look at this world I made. But he also works in such a way as to have a garden there for Adam and Eve to live in. And to make sure that he's worked his design in such a way that the animals, the fish, the humans certainly, that everything in this ecosystem has what it needs. Well, did Adam and Eve and do you and I, do we also have opportunities to create? Not out of nothing, of course, but do we have an opportunity to use the things that God, the resources God has given us, to share ourselves with the world? And do we have an opportunity in our work to care for other people in some way? To help the world be a place where people are provided for and protected and their needs are met. And it doesn't matter if you're making sandwiches or you're business owner or you're a police officer or whatever the role is that you have. There are so many different ways that we can create and we can care. Here's the difference, though. The difference. Our work happens in the context of stewardship. What does it mean to be a steward?
Look after, attend.
Look after something that belongs to someone else. So when we work in the world, does the world belong to us? Do other people belong to us? Do the resources really belong to us? We've just been entrusted with this particular place and time that we find ourselves living in. And so Adam and Eve, they're going to work in the garden, but they're going to work as God's image, right? As God's representative in the world. To do what God would have them do in the world rather than what they might just see fit to do for themselves. So we think of verses like this isn't on the slide, but Psalm 127:1, Psalm 145, other places. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders do what? The builders labor in vain. If God isn't working in our work, right? If our work isn't connected to God's will for the world, ultimately our labor will be in vain. So we talk about the goodness of work. And when we're thinking about this, I couldn't help but reading Genesis 2, I couldn't help but coming to this conclusion. Isn't it a blessing for humans to be trusted with responsibility by God? Think about when you were a child and your parents allowed you to do something they hadn't allowed you to do before. Whether that was when you were very little and they were, letting you take some risk of climbing something, or whether that was letting you get behind the wheel of a car. A lot of different responsibilities along the way. But as a child, as a kid, those were exciting moments. To be given that trust, that responsibility to say that, Mom might be holding on for dear life, but she's trusted me enough to take the wheel and to turn this car on, and here we go. And my mom and I never got in any disagreements about driving, just so you know. All right. Yeah. And I always tell you everything seriously up here. No sarcasm. Work is a basic human need. There are all kinds of studies that exist that show how destructive it is for a person to be unable to feel like they're contributing to the world. And notice I put in parentheses, whether for pay or not. There's a lot of things people do, whether they are, young or old, whatever their situation in life. There's a lot of things people do that may not be for pay. But work, having something to create, having something to show that you care and to work for others, is a basic human need. It's as important to yourself, to your body and soul to work, as it is, to have things like relationships and food and water and all of those sorts of things. It's a basic need that we have. When you think about that work week of God, right? 7 days. How many days did God work of the 7? 6. And how many days did he rest? And it would have been really nice if he would have gone ahead and got his work done on day 2, and 5 days off. That would have really been something. But think about it. We can take more work than we can leisure. We can take more work and it not hurt us than we can take leisure. When we have nothing but leisure time, does that tend to lead to good outcomes for us? You've probably had this experience, I know I have, where maybe there have been times where, like, Sarah takes the kids to her parents for a weekend or something, and I am not tagging along on that particular trip. And I'll go into that weekend and I'll have a list of 30 things. I'm like, I'm going to get all these things done, And then it'll be like Saturday at 8 o'clock. I'll be thinking, what happened to my list, So leisure, sometimes it's hard for us to, it doesn't mean that we're doing all kinds of, evil things, but it's hard for us to sometimes handle time when it's not connected to some very tangible, concrete work that we're doing in the world. So work's a good thing, and it's hard for us sometimes to accept that because it can feel like a burden. Here's what Jesus says about God. My Father is always at work to this very day, and I am working too. My Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working. Let me ask you the question. Why is it that needing to work can make us at times feel less free? Why does needing to work, having to work, make us feel less free?
I feel like your time is not yours.
Someone else is, your time isn't yours, and someone's kind of telling you what to do. Especially if you don't enjoy the particular task that you need to do. If you're being forced to do something that you don't have a lot of interest in doing.
I think if we think of it the way he wants us to think of it, that we're working for him. I don't care what we're doing as far as work and everything. Work as if you're working for the Lord, it can ease that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if we have the right attitude, the right mentality, then we can learn to look at it a different way. Definitely.
You might have to do something in your work that you would do better in a different way.
Yeah.
It fits with you're not free in your work sometimes to do something is going to work, but your boss or the parameters of what you're doing won't let you do it.
Yeah, and maybe the counterpoint to that, or the other side of that coin is, maybe you have to do something that is not going to work. It's like, I have a way to do it that will work, and maybe this way will work too, but maybe it also won't work, but I'm going to have to do it so that could happen, certainly. Anything else come to your mind? Work making us feel less free?
A lot of times we make it a priority, which consumes all the time, and you almost become addicted to it. And then
Yes.
You still work, work, emails come in on your cell
Yeah.
phone 24/7.
We've noticed, haven't we, that we've had a lot of technological advancements over the recent years. Think about email just as being one of those. Before you have to send a literal letter in the mail. And the idea was, think about how easy this is going to make your life. You can send emails to people and get it taken care of, very quickly. Did email make us work less? Not at all, right? So the world is always going to have a certain capacity for what it expects us to produce, and it seems to be going up and up and up, and it can consume us. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, so we'll put a pin in that for just a second, but we're going to come back to it. Let's think about if work is a good thing in general, right? Not every job is a positive thing. You could be employed doing some very shady things, but in general, work is a good thing. And sometimes we sell ourselves a kind of a fantasy of life without work. This is the opposite of what you're describing, Jürgen, and we're going to come to that side of the coin in just a second. Sometimes we can sell ourselves the fantasy of not needing to work at all. But if it's true that God made us to work, then whether or not we need the paycheck based on what our bank account is or where we're at in life and those sorts of things, to stop working is really to stop being true to our nature, right? And maybe that work, depending on a person's health, depending on a person's situation in life, their situation geographically, economically, all these different things. But that work looks very different for different people. Maybe for someone that's working 50 hours a week doing a particular thing. Maybe for other people that's sending cards to encourage people. Whatever the thing is, but we need something. And to sell ourselves a fantasy of not working at all, it's kind of like, and by the way, this is Keller's analogy, but it's known to us all as a common one. It's kind of like a fish swimming in the water, going, if only I could live on the dry land, then I'd be happy. You ever seen a fish on the dry land before? How's that look? Not working very well. And so when we think about freedom, when we think about being free, a fish is most free when it's in the water, isn't it? It's most free when it is in open water, able to swim and do what it's made to do. And in the same way, we're most free when we view ourselves as God views us. And part of that is having something that we're doing, contributing to the world. Keller's way of phrasing it is to say that freedom is not about the absence of restriction, but the right ones. Now that is a quote that applies to a lot more than work. And this is a biblical principle. We could look at a lot of passages. But think about marriage. In our culture, sometimes marriage is viewed as being repressive and restrictive. And why would you ever want to commit your whole life to one person when there's all these kinds of different people out there? And from the Christian perspective, I'm most free in connecting with another person, another human being, when it takes place in a context of commitment. I'm most free when I'm able to give myself wholly to my wife and she's able to give herself wholly to me, because it's like swimming in water as a fish, right? And someone could look out and say, if only I had, the ability to have all these different encounters with all these different people, or whatever the scenario is. Freedom, it's not about the absence of restriction, but it's about the right ones. And work, it's part of living a good life. the life that Jesus wants to give us. And so that's, I think, something that we all want to keep in mind. Here's a quote from the book of Isaiah. Here's what God says. First time I read this verse, by the way, kind of unlocked something for me. This was years ago, about how to view Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers. I don't know where you're at if you're following along with like an annual Bible reading plan. You start in Genesis. Narrative, stories, powerful stuff, you know. You get into Exodus, the story's getting very, there's a coming to a climax moment, leaving Egypt, through the Red Sea, Sinai, and then we get all the laws. And sometimes, myself included, those laws can feel hard to get past, to get through, because they're technical, they're detailed, they don't seem particularly relevant. I read this verse, and this kind of helped me think about these things. I am the Lord your God, who teaches you what is best for you, who directs you in the way you should go. If only you had paid attention to my commands, your peace would have been like a river, and your well-being like the waves of the sea. Why does God give us commands? For whose sake does God give us commands? For our sake, right? It's for His glory ultimately, but it's for our good, for our joy. In His words, our peace. That God is saying to the people of Israel, I've tried to give you peace and joy like the waves of the sea, just washing up again and again and again. That like a river flowing in a dry land, that you would be satisfied because of what I have told you about how to live in the world. All those commands that they had in their, system, every one of those commands ultimately was to serve their good, their joy. Moses even says so in another place in Deuteronomy. And nothing's changed. The things God teaches us in His Word, it's still teaching. God's still teaching us for this purpose. That if we would listen to what He's saying, we would have peace like a river and well-being like the waves of the sea. And that applies to work. That applies to thinking about how I view what is ultimately best for me. Now, to Jürgen's point, work is a good thing, but it can become a problem. How so? Quickly, if you can think of some things. Jürgen mentioned it can consume all of our time. What else? Say a bit more about that.
Needing to make more money, but you're not in a position to do so.
Okay, so there is the complication of trying to do the thing you want to do, but also needing to provide for your family.
Being in love with your job, and a lot of things get neglected.
Or being so consumed by your job that you're neglecting other important aspects of life.
You're going to have to deal with relationships with people who are not Christians. They might be your boss, it might be someone who works with you, and so that can be some problems.
You're going to have to work with all kinds of people. It's going to be an experience. Doesn't work sometimes threaten to become our identity? I am what I do. God rested from His work, Genesis 2 and 3, which we read earlier. I won't read it all again, but He finished what He did. On the seventh day, He rested. In fact, He calls out, He says, this is a special thing I'm doing here, right? This is a holy thing. I'm resting from the work that I'm doing. When is He going to mention this again? In the law, just a little while later, if you're reading along, he's going to say to the people of Israel, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of Sabbath. What does Sabbath mean, literally? Do you know? It means rest. We're going to have a rest day. And you know what? And I think you've heard me say this before, but I was floored reading Exodus when the people of Israel, they're being told, God's going to provide for you bread from heaven and everything on the Sabbath day. Before the Sabbath, you'll get double portion. You won't have to work on that day. And God says, and if you break this, I will kill you. I thought, wow, that seems harsh, But the more that I thought about it, and we discussed this, maybe last year or two, isn't it true that we can become so centered on work that nothing can pry us loose from our focus on what we're doing? And God, again, for their joy, said, I'm not going to let this happen to you. And I understand, old covenant, new covenant, all that kind of thing. But rest, whether it's, the Sabbath day or not, rest is an important biblical principle. It tempers us from the opposite temptation. If there's a temptation to say, life would be perfect without work, there's the other temptation to say, the meaning of my life is what I do. And when that is anything, that is an idol for us. This is what I want to close with this morning. Not everything in life is a matter of utility. What does utility mean? If you value something because of its utility, what do you value it for? What it does for you. Not everything in life is a matter of utility. Here's a way that we could think about it. We could read Ecclesiastes and we could get a lot of information about this, but think about food. Couldn't God have given us one food source that was the optimal food? It just grew on a tree or something. And it was packed with exactly the right ratio of this vitamin and this nutrient and these carbs and sugar and protein and all those kinds of things. Now that would put a lot of people out of work. But couldn't God have done that? Maybe that's what Ezekiel bread is. I don't know. But anyway. A little humor. Why didn't he?
Well, he really did when he gave them manna.
He really did when he gave them manna. He gave them that one food source. But why don't we still eat manna? Why didn't God just give manna and there was nothing else to eat on the planet Earth?
Same reason we eat pork now.
Why is that?
Things have changed. It's free. Free now more in Christ. And those things are not needed for our, safety or well-being or whatever.
Yeah. For sure. But why did God say, I'm going to make thousands of kinds of trees and... Yeah, go ahead, Willie.
He knows what's best for us. He knows we need variety. We're going to complain. Just like the Israelites do, we'll do the same thing.
He gave us variety. He gave us variety of taste. He gave us variety of appearance, right? Not all of these, fruits and vegetables and, even meat and things. They don't all look the same, taste the same. Variety of fragrance, smell. Everything that, you look at, he gives us this variety to choose from. Why did God give us variety? Was it because of its utility? We had to have it in order to survive. Couldn't God have just given us one thing? We know he could because he did for Israel once. Why all the variety?
Created us to love variety.
Yeah.
We're created to thrive on variety of everything. Food, what you do, how you are, clothes you wear, the jobs you do.
I think that we can, reasonably conclude that God, He loves variety. Think about all the animals He made. Some of the animals you see, you say, wow, I don't know if that needed to make the cut, but it did. He loves variety. He loves not just giving us life, but filling the world with vitality, right? With something to rejoice in. And I get the sense that nothing that God, I don't get the sense, I know this, nothing that God did in creating the world was out of laziness or out of lack of thought. I mean, can you imagine God creating strawberries and saying, when they find these, they're going to love them? And creating lemons or grapefruit, thinking they're going to eat an orange and they're going to come to this and they're going to think it's going to be sweet. But they're going to learn how to use it, right? They're going to learn how to enjoy it. God's given us all of these wonderfully, the wonderful variety in the world because He loves us. There's a reason Sarah and I don't sit down and say, for the next 6 months, we're going to force the kids to eat the same dinner, We could. They would survive. They would live. But we love them. We want to experience new things and receive them as blessings. Here's the point of all of that. Work is not all there is to life. And God has created us to do good things, but He's not created us to be defined solely by what we do, but rather to be defined as being His children. Okay, that's all the time that we have for this morning, and we'll look forward to picking back up next week.